Over the last year, I've added an inch to my forearms.
And it actually was fairly easy.
Once I fully understood the anatomy of the forearm. As you can see, your forearm is made up of 20 individual muscles, each with their own specific function. Everything from wrist flexion, extension, radial deviation, ulnar deviation, pronation, supination, stabilization, and even flexion of the elbow. So we're gonna go over the absolute best way to train each one of these muscles because it matters. Also, at the end of this video, I'll give you one of the exact workouts I've been doing. For years, I neglected the finger extensors and flexors because I assumed isometric holds would get the job done. I was wrong. Over time, I developed tennis elbow in my right arm and golfer's elbow in my left, meaning that I couldn't pick up shit in the yard with my right hand and I couldn't do supinated curls with my left. It sucked. So if you're dealing with either of those, this will absolutely help, on top of hypertrophy, increasing grip strength, yada, yada, yada. So let's start this out by taking a relatively small shit in the cereal of anybody that believes that the farmer's carry is the end-all be-all for forearm training. The farmer's carry or any sort of static hold have a very distinct benefit. They increase neural adaptations faster than dynamic contractions, your typical eccentric concentric, so they're a great way to increase grip strength, especially when the hold you're doing closely resembles the exercise you want to increase grip endurance on. For example, say you wanted to increase grip strength for your deadlifts, then the best way is get a straight bar, put moderate to heavy weight on there, use your exact grip you're going to use for deadlifts, and hold that. But isometrics have limitations. Yes, they induce faster neural adaptations and can create a small amount of hypertrophy. However, if we want to continue increasing grip strength, we need to increase the cross-sectional area of the muscles involved, specifically contractile proteins in the finger flexor muscles. And the way we do that is with good old extension, flexion, dynamic movements, which will induce more hypertrophy, and that's why we're doing this whole thing, right? That's the purpose. We want jacked forearms. On top of that, forearms are the muscle that show the greatest correlation between size and strength. So, yeah. If isometrics were all we needed, then we all would have had jacked forearms in high school, thanks to Heather Brooke. By all means, keep doing your isometric holds, but you're going to want to pair them with the dynamic movements I'm going to show you today. Starting out with the anterior side of the forearm, the flexor compartment. That's fucking weird. Now, most of the time, you're going to see the anterior compartment broken down into 3 separate layers, which is nice because you understand depth, but it's still pretty confusing. There is a lot going on here. Instead, everything gets a lot simpler when you just pair them by their action. Let's start out by going over the muscles that are responsible for your grip. The flexor digitorum superficialis is responsible for digits 2 through 5, and they assist in closing your hand. The flexor digitorum profundus is responsible for actually closing your grip. And we probably should add the flexor pollicis longus to this, because it does flex your thumb, but it's an awful muscle to train. You got to go on Amazon, buy a little rubber donut, and that's the best way to train it. It's ridiculous. One of those finger flexors inserts into the middle phalanges, while the other inserts into the distal phalanges, meaning that the best way to train those muscles is by doing wrist curls and allowing the weight to roll all the way into your fingers to get the greatest possible stretch. You could make the case that using a hand gripper like this could be an even better exercise because it's easier to overload, there's an isometric component to it, but I personally prioritize hypertrophy first and then grip strength second. So yeah, if you're somebody who's an arm wrestler or you beetle clamp for a living, you're probably gonna like this more. Me personally, I like to put that muscle at length under load, and every time I use this, I just squeeze it till I can't touch it anymore, and I get frustrated. Speaking of finger flexors, I'm sure at some point in your lifting career, you've used fat grips, and probably incorrectly. More often than not, I see kids at the gym attaching to a barbell or dumbbell like this and doing regular curls because it is the secret to bigger overall arms, which you can't really blame them. If you look at their website, they have this nice illustration that shows a before and after. It's hard not to believe it. Based on the research, these will actually decrease bicep activation when you use them on curls, which is fine because that's not even what they're supposed to be used for. These are for wrist flexion and extension. I think the marketing person just got a little overzealous and excited, or they're an idiot. The true beauty of this is it increases the width of your grip, therefore starting the finger flexors out at a longer length. So if you're somebody that doesn't like to let the bar roll into your fingers when you're doing wrist curls, this is a great alternative. Same. Probably not the most effective thing for your bicep curls, though. I know. Sorry. It looked so freaking cool. Now that you have a couple effective ways to train the finger flexors, let's talk about a group that's a little bit more fun to train because you can actually see them, the primary wrist flexors in the superficial layer. Here's something that's interesting that most people just don't factor in, and that's that these flexor muscles originate on the medial epicondyle of the humerus. You don't have to know what that is, just know that it's over here. So the natural line of action of these muscles isn't at the center of the wrist down the forearm. It's better to think about them contracting at an angle, because actually what's involved is flexion, pronation, and a slight bit of ulnar deviation. That's why most people will feel a general awkwardness with wrist curls, because they are. You're essentially cutting the range of motion in half. So the best thing you could do is find exercises that follow that natural line of action, and lucky for you, I have no life, and I found them all. One of my favorite ways is putting two individual handles on the cable stack. It allows you to lean forward and get a nice deep stretch, but even more important than that, you can pronate and get that slight ulnar deviation as you come down. And this is kind of where you can develop your own method of training, because in this exercise, you can absolutely let it roll into your fingers and use it as a finger flexor exercise, or you can simply just keep it into your wrists and flex it that way, or because the finger flexors are generally a lot weaker of a muscle, you can use it as a mechanical drop. You start out with your finger flexors, and then once those fail, grip it and rip it with your wrist. That's what I do. I rip it. One of my other favorite exercises is one of the dumb reasons I bought this little Tykes bench that Prime makes. Kind of why, yeah. The thing I like about it is it gives you the perfect angle to do wrist curls, which don't buy the bench just for that. Most benches will do this. I guess the real benefit for me is it doesn't sound like this one. What I found is that if you lean into your working side, it's gonna perfectly line up those fibers, and then from there, just don't fight that ulnar deviation. You want that. And if you want to, you can do the same mechanical drop here. Let it roll into your fingers, flex it up. Once that starts to fail, just go straight into wrist flexion. Which brings us to the last group on the anterior side, the pronators, which I know there's so many different muscles to hit. No wonder my forearms are so small before. I wasn't doing half this shit. The best way I found to train your pronators is using a looped strap like this. And you really don't need the loop, you just need any sort of strap-like attachment, because we're gonna pronate and let it roll onto our knuckles. Now, this isn't ideal because we have to actually hold an isometric contraction with our biceps as we work against that rotational force, but if this is all you have, it works pretty damn good. And just a slight note, I get a little bit better connection when I bring that elbow slightly out in front of me and then do it. There's always the classic dumbbell variation, but the strength curve just isn't ideal. I actually just found this guy on Instagram who makes a pretty legit forearm machine. Again, you don't need it, but if you're a hermit like me that likes to train in his garage, not a bad investment. The arm wrestling community also has a great set of tools for training your forearms. Eventually, you'll wind up finding something like this, which after spending about an hour trying to stick, you're gonna realize that it's put your wrists in a more natural position to flex, pronate, and adduct. So yeah, I bought these two. Well, that just about covers the anterior side. Now let's go over the posterior side, which shouldn't take that long. There's only 12 more muscles. It's actually not as bad as you think. We just have to group those bastards together. Let's start out with a group of finger extensors. I've heard people say stick your hand in a bag of rice and spread your fingers apart, but there's no real way to progress that. And on top of that, it's only a matter of time before you have that awkward conversation with your wife. What do you think I'm doing? I'm fisting a bag of rice. Now again, you might be tempted to use fat grips for this, but that's actually a really bad idea because like we talked about, it's an isometric contraction, but in this case, your extensor muscles are shortened the entire time, so it makes even less sense. Grip endurance? Yes. Hypertrophy strength? No. The best I've found, unfortunately, are these. And I would prefer not to have to buy these little things that look like they came out of a quarter machine just to train my finger extensors, but these allow you to progress through different levels. And it's critical you don't neglect these because I believe that lateral and medial epicondylitis is caused by not dynamically training those finger extensor and flexor muscles. This should be a big aha for you. Golfer's elbow, medial epicondylitis, and tennis elbow, lateral epicondylitis, are just categorized as inflammation in their corresponding tendons. Once you realize that a lot of these anterior muscles share a common tendon, same goes for the posterior side, you understand you can't neglect any of these stupid muscles no matter how small because you run the risk of overuse injuries, i.e. inflammation. You have to train every single one of these little bastards. Believe me. Both my issues were relatively bad. I had to ease into training those smaller muscles, so I started out by just not wearing straps during back day whatsoever, which sucked at first. Then I added in heavier eccentrics because it helps you retrain any sort of protective movement patterns you might be doing. And then once I was good with that, full range of motion, extension, and flexion. And now I am an adult with fully functional forearms. All right, back to the list of muscles that we have yet to train. Now we can skip over the anconeus because it's a relatively weak stabilizer at best, and they often use it for tendon transfers, and it's gonna get hit with other stuff. So screw it. For the supinator, I just grabbed the same strap attachment I used for pronation and supinate. And again, you could use a dumbbell for this, but I don't love it. Now, when it comes to training the 3 primary wrist extensors, you're gonna have to make a decision on what you value the most because all 3 of them cross over that elbow joint, so it makes sense to keep your arm as straight as possible while you do that. But also 2 of the 3 muscles aid in radial deviation, while the other one, ulnar deviation. So it might make sense to use a single handle, that way you can actually abduct or adduct your wrist and follow the natural line of action of those muscles. Even though that elbow is bent and you're slightly shortening it, it could be beneficial. It's a preference thing. I say screw it and you do what you feel the most. Because honestly, one of my favorite exercises is just throwing on 2 handles and pulling those things apart. Biomechanically incorrect. Painful? Yes. Finally, let's finish up by talking about the biggest of all 4 muscles that has no effect on the wrist whatsoever and actually is a flexor of the elbow, the brachioradialis. The only thing you need to know to understand this muscle is that it originates on the lateral part of the humerus, wraps around and inserts distally in the lateral part of the radius. That's why you're gonna hear a lot of people say, just do hammer curls, because your brachioradialis is supposed to be your strongest elbow flexor, and as long as your wrist is in a neutral position, it perfectly lines up the insertion with the origin. But I don't know about you, my brachioradialis didn't grow shit from hammer curls. Turns out when you look at some of the research, there's a lot of inter-subject variability in terms of what is their strongest elbow flexor. For some people, it is the brachioradialis. For others, it's the biceps brachii. All that means for you is that if you have decent biceps and brachioradialis, then you're gonna have to pronate to limit the activation of those biceps. My 2 favorite variations are this reverse grip Smith drag curl, which I know sounds like a horrible idea, but it will give you the most pain in your brachialis and brachioradialis than you've ever felt. It feels so good, it feels dangerous. I just lean slightly back and then unlock the Smith as I drag it up, let it relock. And you wouldn't think it would work that good, but it does. The other one is using those same loop straps, but you can use a long rope, it really doesn't matter. But start by pointing those thumbs in and rotate as you come up. Also very painful. And it might make sense to do a hammer curl across your body, get less bicep activation, but I find that I feel an even better connection if I do a drag style pinwheel curl. So coming up and pulling out at the same time, that to me gets a better connection with that brachioradialis. Just looks dumb. Here is the exact workout that I will put in the Swole app that you can download and do for free. There'll be a link in the description. Don't worry, this one is free. Don't freak out. I would just like you to do it and grow. Good luck. Hey, look, I got it. And it's glorious.